Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Melissa, for inviting me to be in this conversation. I'm very excited. Thank you all for coming. Lina, I would like to welcome you in Arabic first. أهلا وسهلا فيكي بالجامعة عنا. كتير مبسوطين إنك معنا اليوم. Thank you for coming. I know you were on a campus tour, and this is the last stop, so we're lucky and we're excited to, ask you a few questions. Hopefully they're not, you have answered them a zillion times by now.
Probably, yes, madam. I'm okay with it.
Before I ask my questions, I want to just make a few comments, or not comments even, just reflections that I had after watching the documentary. And, as someone who, studies Palestinian history and write about it, I also center women and gender, and I use oral history as a method. I was really struck by, I appreciated your approach in centering 4 generations of Palestinian women, including yourself, and also, by doing that, showing us, a very raw depiction, or not even depiction, but a very raw reality of the beauty, the complexity, the sorrow, the love that kind of embodies what it means to be a Palestinian. I think for me, I saw your film as also a historical piece and a very rich archive that really shows how our history, Palestinian history, is not defined by the Zionist colonization of our land in the early 20th century and the manifestation of that violence in the Nakba. I think you show, footage of, Palestinian living, children going to school, seeking education, the love of education, sports. And I think that's a very valuable narrative, or even images to see, because it really counters one of the most prevalent narrative about, Zionist narrative about, a land without a people for people without a land. And you also show how the Nakba is a process through the stories of your great-grandma, your mom, and yourself even. We see how it manifests in different ways, the choices that they had to make, lack of choices in some situation, and you not being born there is kind of a rupture to your family being, from Palestine. And then I think you also really depict something so well that resonates with me as a Palestinian who grew up, in Jordan, is, how beauty exists simultaneously with the pain. You show us the weddings, the sisterhood, these tough conversations that a lot of women have with their parents, with their fathers, and the insistence, to cross colonial boundaries and separation that exist. And finally, I think your documentary is very much about existence, rootedness in the land, and the rebuilding and reconnecting, which is something that, reminded me of Gaza right away. And that, in spite of the genocide and in spite of how the US and Israel continue to want to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, we see how people in Gaza are rebuilding and going back to their homes, or what's left of their homes, and connecting with their family members. So, I think that's the power of your documentary for me. And in that, I want to ask you, how were you able to bring all these layers into the documentary? Why was it so important for you to, show the 4 generations of women? I know Melissa mentioned that your first film was about your grandparents in Algeria, but now you're centering Palestine. So when did you decide to make a film on Palestine? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you all for being here. Usually I come present the film, but it was too cold, so I decided to come just at the end. I'm very moved to see so many people, and I want to thank, before starting, Melissa for organizing all this. We've been in touch for a while, and I'm happy that it's happening. As a fellow Algerian, I'm very proud. So when I was making the Algeria, I didn't think I would do another film after. I mean, I didn't think of the film that I would do after, because my first film really came from the need to break the silence that existed around the story of my Algerian grandparents. That is not a silence that has been chosen, but it's a silence that have been imposed due to the reality of the French colonization of Algeria and the trauma of the colonization. So as a start, in order to be able to reconnect with my family stories, I had to break this silence. And it's only once I did the Algeria that I realized how much these collective stories, this collective history affects and affected transmission between generations and affected the way that we are linked to our land, to our family, to our identity, to the different languages that exist around us. So I felt that it was really important to keep on exploring these intimate memories so that we can talk about our collective story. And in the case of Palestine, it was even more vital and necessary because the story is not written officially, it's not recognized. So if we don't tell our story, we don't exist. No one will tell it for us, or they will tell it in a stigmatized way and not showing the reality of who we are. So it's only when I started sharing the Algeria that I thought that I could do this film, that I found the strength to do it as well, because I saw how the audience was touched by a story that I thought maybe was too personal, but actually that allowed a lot of people to connect with, because I think the more intimate you go, the more you can connect with people, because it's what unites us all in the end, even with the singularity of each of our stories. And it was very natural for me to film the women because they're more numerous than the men in my family. And I feel like the women in my Palestinian family were really the bearers of our memory. Not because it's not like something natural in women, it's just the state of things. Men at the time of the Nakba, at the time of the war, were outside fighting while women were inside. And so the way that they were receiving what was happening allowed them to have kind of some kind of distance and time to process and be able to hold this memory, to transmit it, while the men either died, either were too traumatized to be able to talk about what was happening. And it's kind of what happened with my great-grandfather, Hosni, who actually passed away because of the trauma. So these women have been able not only to keep the memory alive, but also to transmit it. And despite, as you said, فقدان, despite the loss and despite the displacement, they've been able to keep on living, not only surviving, but living by celebrating all aspects of life through weddings, through birthdays, through family bonds, through the education of children and the transmitted values of love and forgiveness. And so this is what I always admired. And also I felt like I needed to tell their story because all I knew of Palestine and the Palestinian culture that I received was only positive things that just enriched everything. And so I didn't understand, there was like a dissonance, a cognitive dissonance. I didn't understand why Palestinians were portrayed in such a stigmatized and dehumanized way. It was so the opposite of what I knew, of all Palestinians I knew. So I felt like you just had to film a Palestinian to tell and just try to be authentic so that we could appear as we are to the world. And so this is how it started, the idea of filming these women.
Hello? Okay. Thank you so much, Lina. I really appreciate that you came with your.
You have to.
Oh, up. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate that you came all this way. And it's really a thrill for me as a filmmaker to meet you. This is actually the third time I've seen your film. And I appreciate it more each time because I catch some of the little nuances and sentences that I would miss. And I can see how careful the editing is, how you cut between faces and photos. And it's a really It's such a lovely, powerful film. I had a question. I wanted to follow up on something you were just saying, and that's about silences. So what was it like to make a film with your mother, who's a famous actress, who many of us may have seen in various movies? Ordinarily famous actors try to a little bit control their stories and have a persona on screen. And then, of course, that's not really who they are underneath it all. But you have that relationship with your mother. And then telling a documentary story sometimes is harder than telling a fictional story, because you can't really expose people and everything about their identity that you know. So starting from there, but you wanted your mother to tell this story of this multi-generational narrative. So I'm just curious, in trying to get telling the story, what were some of your approaches that maybe we didn't see in the film? We saw some approaches in the film, like showing photographs or reading from notebooks and poetry and visits and conversations. It was really a rich tapestry of ways to tell stories. What were some of the things that were personally really difficult for you or your mother? Or were there times that you felt like you couldn't put something in the film, or what was that like?
Filming my mother has been not an easy process. Well, I'm a very controlling person, so I was stronger than her. First of all, it was hard for her to be facing a documentary camera, because she's used to fiction, so she's used to movie sets where she embodies the emotions and the stories of other characters. So it's kind of a way to protect also her intimacy. So suddenly she had this camera and her daughter that was asking her to talk about her own life and choices, which was very hard for her, as well as the fact that my mother is someone that really moves forward and doesn't look behind. So again, it was hard for her to go back on some of her life events. And so it was hard for me to find the right way of filming her. Also because I had to find a way to address to my mother as a woman, as a director, and not only as her daughter. So we had to find a balance in the relationship. So many times we were not at ease, neither her nor myself. She would ask, like, why are you doing this? I would ask myself, why am I doing this? And at the same time, we kept on trying, because we both knew that the film was not about her nor about me. It was not a portrait of her as an actress. The film was about 4 generations of women, of Palestinian women, and something that was beyond us. It was not about our relationship as mother-daughter. This was not interesting for me. And it was not about how she became an actress either. It was really about how she, as a Palestinian woman, how she was affected by what happened to the women before her, and what she kept of this inheritance, and what she transmitted to me or not, and the choices that she made for herself and the choices that she had to make. And so, as we both were conscious of that, we really made the effort of finding the best way to tell the story together. And this is when I started including her and telling the story with me through involving her and putting the photos on the wall, me writing text that I asked her to read on camera, which is my voice but with her emotion. And so I also used the fact that she was an actress to allow her to feel at ease. And this is when I also decided to ask her to reenact moments of her youth, so that she could forget about, like the fact that she was transmitting her emotions. And even if I was putting her in her own character, it was still like a kind of a way to allow her to put her guards down, and it eventually worked.
second and last question. I love the part where, your mom is reading your notes or thoughts about, your relationship to the land and how you're connected to Jesus and how the family is holy. It's very sweet. But it made me think, and your mom didn't know, so she's learning something about you. And I'm sure you've learned also a lot about your mom and your aunts and, everyone that was involved. So I was wondering if you can talk a bit about, how it affected you, like your relation to Palestine, your families, were there surprises? I mean, you do show us very intimate conversation that we usually don't want to talk about in public. So yeah, I was wondering.
I don't think the film has changed anything, because if I did it this way, it was because I was already very close to my family, and I was visiting. I know the place. I'm very close to the place. The thing is, what I was looking for was not really my link to the place, but more my place and their place in history. As women, as a family, as Palestinians. So I think this is what brought us more together, was that it's not as a family or as, again, a niece and an aunt or a granddaughter and grandmother. It's more together as women and as Palestinian women, and our experience in this world as women who try to find their place between worlds, as women who come from stories of exile and displacement and loss. So I think it connected us more on a political level, on a symbolical level, rather than emotional, because it didn't change anything in the relationship that I had with my aunts, but it brought us closer in what we are in the world, what we represent, what we want to be, what we want to transmit. And this is something I felt when my aunts saw the film for the first time, because I was really fearing this moment, hoping they would be okay with the film, that they wouldn't feel like exposed, and they were so moved and so proud to be part of the story, and that their story was existing. Because for us, for them, as for my mother, as for me, it's a way to be seen as well, as Palestinians. So it gives you back a place in the world when you are every day struggling to make your identity present, and to make your humanity present, because people are dehumanizing you all the time. So I think it's just it's another level of connection that we gain through the film, as I think also the film and films in general allow us to immortalize things that can disappear. So it's kind of a supernatural thing. It's kind of a magical, spiritual thing that we cannot really achieve through our human life, but films will always exist to remember us, even though people try to erase us. So this is something in particular in the Palestinian story that is very important. And this is also why archives are very important, because we've seen how much archives are precious to us today to prove our existence, and each image that we find is a proof of our existence. And anytime we film in Palestine, it becomes an archive as soon as we stop filming, because we don't know what's going to be left of what we're filming the next day. So I think it's all these things together that makes the experience like strong in what it brings to us as bonds, as families, and as human beings.
Well, you asked my question. It's okay. But okay.
We can open to the audience whenever you're.
I just want to ask you one other question
Yeah.
about the making of the film. We have here a lot of students, including Palestinian students who are aspiring filmmakers. And I was wondering if there's something you wanted to say about the making of the film, and how you put the pieces together. So I think it's when I show films in classes, it's weird. Sometimes I want to show a really beautiful film such as yours, but people don't really know how they're going to get to this level of making this kind of film. So then instead I find myself showing very short student-made films because it's easy to understand how they came together. Can you talk a little bit about the process of how you got from the idea of what you've been talking about? I want to tell the story of 4 generations of women in my family that shines a light on the collective Palestinian experience. But then how did you know what kind of things you wanted to go after? How did you know, okay, I have to go film this, I should put these people on camera? Once you collected some interviews, what happened in the editing room? How does a feature-length documentary come together?
It's a very good question. First of all, it's long. It's not from one day to another, and you don't have the film in your head when you start. I mean, I've never had a film in my head before making it. My first film took me like 4 years. My second film took me 5 years. I kind of did it at the same time. I even want to say maybe took me 7 years because I started thinking about it. It's also a matter of who you're working with. You don't do a film alone. I couldn't have done either of my films if I didn't have my editor, Ladi Juju, who is Lebanese, with whom I write, with whom I edit, with whom I also think of what I'm gonna film. I never film and edit and then finish. I always write, film, edit, film again, write again. We write in the editing room. When you see the film, you see my voiceover, for example. We wrote it the last 3 weeks of editing. After 5 years of editing, I didn't want a voiceover, and I accepted at the end. And we actually could write it only at this moment because we had to put all the rest together. When you see the scenes of my mother reading the text that I wrote about the woman of my family, this wasn't planned in the beginning either. I was supposed to film my grandmother, but she passed away through the process of filming. So I had to find another way to tell the story of displacement and the Nakba because she was supposed to be the one telling me on camera. So I found this, I tried, we didn't know if it was going to work. Then I had to find all the archival footage that I didn't have. It also took like 4 or 5 years. So my advice is, first of all, work with people that believe in your project and people that you love artistically, that you trust, to allow you to get to your vision, because no one is a genius. It's all about work. It's a lot of work. For example, when we wrote the voiceover, I spent 3 weeks reading, not sleeping, thinking of words. My editor would call me at 3 a.m, like, I thought of this word, tried to write text. I was working all the time. When you do a film, your film is in your head every day. I'm not saying you don't take pauses sometimes, and you have to work as well because you're not earning a lot of money with your film. But it's just like a lot of work, reflection. You try things. Some things work, some things don't work. Until you finish the film, you don't know what you're going to have. I mean, for me, I wasn't seeing the film until we actually closed the editing. And even after we closed the editing, we didn't have all the sound work. Then you spend 2 more minutes doing the sound, trying things, and then you build the music. So it's a whole process. And I think the most important thing is to know why you're making this film, what you want to say, and to understand the choices that you make are based on your intentions. And they are not artistic choices. We don't make films because it's beautiful. If you want to do beautiful things, you make video clips, or, like, we make films because they have a meaning. So when you choose to put one scene after the other, it's because it makes sense and not just because you like the light. There's a lot of things that I didn't use, although I loved the light, or I loved this, because if you don't know why you're putting them next to each other, the audience will never understand and will never be able to follow your narrative. And this, I understood it because I had the chance of working with people that really valued meaning, political meaning, emotion, sensation. It's also a matter of sensation. Sometimes you feel something when you see 2 sequences next to each other. You don't really know why, but you feel it and you can put it in words. And this is how you make the choices as well. So it's collaborative work. It's believing in your intuitions. It's trying things. It's not being afraid of failing or doing things that don't work. It's a lot of work as well because you film a lot of things that you're never going to use. but you have to go through this process. Sometimes we say that a good director is someone that is able to put things aside and forget about what you film, which sometimes is the hardest part when you have to abandon something that you love. But it's for the sake of the film.
Yeah.
We have to pass by the mic.
Thank you very much, Shukran Tir. Thank you. You bear witness to the part that your grandmother and your mother play in that grand tragic story of Palestine of the last 100 years. Your grandmother, dispossession, displacement, your mother, exile and return, and you bear witness beautifully to those. What is your, or how do you see your part in that story in terms of the relationship with the land, right? That land part of your Palestine identity. One might think that the return is even more problematic. You know, there's this image with your mother looking over the lake, and there is this Israeli soldiers passing by, and you might think, well, return is even more problematic today than it was ever. So, how do you experience your role and your part in relationship with the land? Is it framed in terms of a return or bearing witness, which is already very great, and to extend that to your generation, how would they relate to the land? Thank you.
Thank you. It's hard for me to answer your question because I don't think of Palestine or the land with these terms. It's a much more sensorial feeling that I don't ask myself, am I bearing witness or am I gonna return or what's my situation? I'm Palestinian, so I carry all of this. I don't have this reflection or this distance. What I know is that when I just look for ways every day to keep on existing with this identity in the face of the world, not for myself, because I know what I have and I know what I am, but, you know, as a human being, as a social animal, as they say, we cannot exist if people don't recognize what we are. So this is a necessity to be able to exist in a society. You have to be recognized, and this is a philosophical and sociological basis. This is so when you're not recognized, you spend your time and your energy doing everything to be recognized. So for me, I don't have to prove my relationship to the land. I just have to be able to express it publicly so that I'm recognized in where I am. And I think the film is a way to affirm that without having to be perceived through the language of others. It's through my own language. It's our complexity. It's our richness. So my relationship with the land is all of the things you've been experiencing in the film. I cannot resume it to one thing. But what I know is that what I feel is that there will never be a goodbye. You know, and always ask why the film is called Bye Bye. For me, it's a constant return, either through the movie, either through the ability to go or not, either through the stories, either through the way we're connected to our ancestors or to other Palestinians we meet abroad or anywhere. There is something that will always allow us to connect to each other because we all share the same reality and the same story. And it's very particular to the Palestinian identity because many Palestinians have never actually been on the land, but the land is in them forever. And we see how much they know about the land and how much has been transmitted. So I think it's much more complex, so it's hard to just say yes or no. But thank you for your question.
Hi, thank you very much. Wonderful movie. I wanted to ask you about the thought process or the deliberate process that you had in placing the settler. Obviously, I think a few weeks ago I heard somebody speak, one of the founders of the Safe Sheikh Jarrah, and they mentioned that in Jerusalem there's always been this idea that the settlers exist, but they're not always there in our heads. living in Jerusalem, for them, it was like they exist within the periphery. They don't dictate. And I think in the movie, I saw that you had two scenes where your mother, there was with an Orthodox Jewish family beside her, and then the Israeli military walking by. So how deliberate was that? Or was that just kind of organic because that's the natural process for you and your family in back home?
Thank you. So for me, it was very conscious that I didn't want them to be a character in the story because I wanted to allow Palestinians to exist, as you said in the beginning, without them and not only in opposition to them or in fight with them, because we exist without them, we existed, and we keep on existing without as well. So it was, there's just the reality makes it impossible to totally not unsee them. So it just happened, like in Tiberias, anyway, there's no Palestinian left in Tiberias. And even if you're trying to have your moment of connection with the lake, but you see that this family is actually American. So, these are tourists that are here and taking the space. The music and the urbanism and the way that the city was transformed takes the space as well, and sounds. So you cannot really totally disconnect from the reality, although you try to find ways to escape this reality and to be with yourself. And it's the same when I went to film my mother in the last scene, after my grandmother passed away as a final scene. I wasn't expecting these soldiers to pass by, so they were there, and so they're part of the decor, and they didn't even give us so much attention either. So it's kind of this, and it's as when you're looking at the landscape and suddenly you see something and you ask what it is, and you're reminded that it's a military or an outpost or a settlement, or when you hear the sounds of the planes, you never know if it's a tourist plane or if it's a war plane. So you're always reminded of that. But I really wanted it to be in the background because also this is also how we live. We have our own bubble, I want to say, that we try to preserve so that we can define ourselves in other ways than with or in opposition to them.
Thank you so much. متشكرين جدا. It was a really beautiful film. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your process of choosing, a little more about your process of choosing which film to use. Like you talked about part of being a filmmaker and artist is being able to leave some things out. Was it harder for you to decide among the footage that you yourself shot, or what to use and what to leave out, or the footage that you were in, like as the footage the home videos that I guess maybe it was your father who filmed them? Was the process different for you between those two kind of sets of material?
Thank you. It was very hard for the home videos because it's so many hours. But at the same time, I really wanted to focus on the moments that we were seeing different generations in the images, and not. It wasn't for me a matter of showing a family. It was really about showing 4 generations and also the culture and the memories that would tell us about not only a family story but about Palestinians. So, and what was interesting is that there was a lot of things that were obviously going to be used in the way that my father shot them. When he films in Jerusalem, he films me and my mother and the soldiers like himself. He already had a gaze and already was putting us in a certain context. When he films me as a kid, he films me and then my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my mother. So he offered me actually this possibility of using that. So of course, there's many things that I didn't use, which are family souvenirs. Also, I couldn't use all the weddings because you imagine that with 10 children and 8 daughters, there was a bunch of weddings because you have the engagement party and the wedding. And so it's a lot of wedding images. And then there are things that came later, like the Super 8 image of my aunt's wedding, which I found after I already chosen all the footage. I didn't know this existed. So then I had to to create a scene to be able to use these images. And these images were really important to me because, again, they're from the 80s, so they allowed us to go even further in time. And the further we go, the more we prove our existence also as historical and the reality of our culture as always existing. Also, what I loved in this footage is that the battery player is a woman, and I thought it was really interesting. And like in the village, that is not really, it's not the city life. And also because we had these patriotic songs from the Egyptian national that at the time represented freedom. Today it's a different story. But at the time, because of Nasser, there was so it also allowed me to connect the Palestinians with the rest of the Arab countries around, when actually as 48 Palestinians, they were totally isolated as until today. So there's a lot of things like this, sometimes you see something and there's so many reasons for you to use it. And when you see something else where you just like it because it's cute, or you just find, you're just moved because you see someone it's not enough reasons to include it. And then the historical footage in black and white, I was looking for specific things. I was looking for faces of women among it. I was looking for students and schools. I was looking for images of the Nakba as well. So it's not like we have so many. And also it was depending on the price, because you have to pay very expensive for these images. So sometimes between two, I would pick the least expensive. I was also looking for destruction. So there was some key words that I had used in my research to find to construct the story as to follow the reality of what happened and illustrate it with images. But sometimes you see an image and it just, and I remember the image that struck me the most when I was looking for historical footage was this image of the women with their stroller, which is actually taken in Haifa in May 48, so the day of the Nakba. And it's actually a moment where they were kicked out of their house. And what was striking for me is that it was the first time that I was seeing women from such a social class. I used to see people that were close to my family's background. And these were the images that we were used to see also of the Nakba, of more like farmers and agriculturists walking. And then suddenly I saw women that were like dressed a bit chic and like these costumes and these strollers, like the city life, the higher social classes. So also reminded me of the reality of the diversity of our society as Palestinians. And it was interesting that I was not shocked, but I was surprised by it also, because you integrate what they try to do, which to make you forget what you have and what you are. So that's why some images became really vital. There was one here. Yeah, the woman and red.
Hi, Lina. Thank you for coming today. So my question is, one of my favorite parts of your film were the home videos that you used. Je suis Algérienne, née à Tizi-Ouzou, donc it's a very similar experience of having these videos to reflect on my own family time. And I was very interested on looking in asking you about the role that both memory and history played when kind of retelling this family story, and also in Algeria and the way you took those family videos mixed with historical archives. So you were working from at least two kinds of archives here. How both were almost necessary in telling these stories, as well as what role your own filmmaking and narration kind of brought to either bring together these two archives. I mean, especially there's a moment in the film where I think in one of the home videos you're learning how to count in Arabic in that game, and then in the end of the film you're counting in Arabic with your family in Palestine, and you can kind of see this connection past and present. And it's like it's your family story, but it's also so much more than that. And so I just wanted to ask about balancing these different archives while working between history and memory.
Thank you very much. So for There Algeria, the archives were a starting point, but I didn't use so much because the reality of the present of the characters took over, and their suffering as exiled people and ex-colonized subjects really took over in the way that I could tell the story. So I had to let the personal footage a bit on the side for the Algeria. But for Bye Tiberias, I know that I want to use more. It wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was mainly because the Palestinian story in reality is so scattered. The memories are dispersed. The families are separated. So in order to tell your story in a linear way and be able to exist on a timeline that is clear for you and for others to be able to tell your story, because when you tell a story, you have to have a starting point and an ending point, and if you go everywhere, no one will follow you. So to be able to have this timeline, you have to go and collect many things. You have to be able to jump from the past to the present while having, of course, a conductor, but you cannot tell the story of Palestine without jumping from past to present, without going back to different timelines. And it's as if you had to recompose a puzzle. I think it's you have to reunite people that haven't been able to live together. You have to reunite places that today are inaccessible. You have to. So all of this was part of the storytelling, the necessity. So it wasn't a desire of including many archives because I like it. It was just, for me, the only way I could tell the story.
Thank you, Lina, for making this beautiful film. With a very, it offers me an intimate glimpse into Palestinian family history and life and struggles. So my question, I'm wondering about your experience working as a programmer in Buenos Aires, Argentina. How has your living experience in Buenos Aires shape your filmmaking, or if it contribute to making this film in any way or form? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how this particular experience would, I cannot connect it to making this film, but it's part of a path. I know that in Argentina, what happened was that through my work as a programmer, I discovered documentary filmmaking, and I started seeing a lot of documentaries from Palestine, and I actually reconnected with Palestinian cinema through documentary because I only knew fiction through the films in which my mother was acting. So it allowed me to discover a whole different way of filmmaking. And I saw a film by Mahdi Fleifel, who is a Palestinian director that is from Ain al-Hilwa, which is a refugee camp and Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, and who lives in Denmark. And he actually he directed a documentary called World Not Ours. I think it's on Netflix. Alam Laysa Lana, which was about his family and his family story. And so I remember when I saw this film, I was really struck, and I realized how intimate stories of other Palestinians also were I could identify with, and I felt there was a lot of similarities, and were also a way for other people to connect with our story. So maybe at this time it planted something in my head. But it's only 5 years after that I did my first film, and my first film was not about my Palestinian family, but my Algerian family. But also I studied history and political science, so I was always interested in and I specialize in Arab contemporary societies. So I feel like it's a lot of things that happened that made me do these films. Although I never considered myself as a documentary filmmaker, I did 2 films, but now we'll see if I can make a third one, and I'm gonna try to make a fiction as well. So it wasn't like a dream of like I want to be a documentary filmmaker. It just happened that when I thought of making a film, it was through documentary with the first one, and then the first one led to the second one, and now I want to make a fiction that is also about family and transmission, but it's another form. So I think, yeah, it's all the experiences that I had that led me to this. But yeah, Argentina played a important part, not because of the Argentinian culture, but because I connected with Palestinian cinema while being there. Although the Argentinian culture is great, I loved it.
Should we take one more question, Melissa? Yeah? Okay, one more.
There's another.
Hi. So I'm also French and North African. I thought it was a really interesting. It was really interesting that the majority of the film was in French, and I was wondering if was that a conscious choice, or I think something a lot of us who have mixed heritages and mixed cultures struggle with. I've seen this in the among many Arab Americans here within the Palestinian rights movement. We struggle with our relationship to these large former or current imperial countries that still shaped us into who we are today. Like, I'm still French, as you are, and I was wondering if you could speak to that complicated relationship of being both the grandchild of someone who was the victim of colonization, as well as still being whatever that relationship looks like to you. I think it looks a little different for many of us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because when you say I'm French, I feel much more Parisian rather than French. So this is a very strong identity I have. Because when I think of the French identity, I cannot really, I think of a colonial identity. So, of course, we're French, but they also thought they were Algerian at some point, or they tried to, take our country for themselves. So I don't think there is such thing as a pure French identity. And I think we have to transform this heritage into something positive. Of course, I'm not like a patriotic French. I never feel proud or happy when I see the French flag. I don't feel connected to it. First of all, because I don't really believe in symbolism, but at the same time, the Algerian flag, the Palestinian flag for me are a positive thing because they represent a struggle for freedom. So it's a very different way of seeing also the symbols of our countries. But I claim the 3 identities in the same level. I don't, and this is something it was hard to build because as I grew up in France, which is a country that doesn't allow you to have such a multiplicity, and that tries to put you in boxes so that they can control you more and define you with their own terms that are usually colonial, they always ask you to choose, and you feel like you have to give the answer that will satisfy the person in front of you so that they allow you to exist and the only way that they can see you. And so nowadays, being able to claim these identities at the same level or claim this complexity allows me to stop answering this question of having to choose or having to please, and also to stop using the language that they have used to describe us. And it's also part of what I discovered through filmmaking, because filmmaking is also creating your own language. And so the question of French in the film was not even so thought of. It was just French is the language that is easier for me to write. I don't write Arabic. I speak fluently the dialects, but I don't write and read easily. I'm not going to write in English, which is not my native language. So I just wanted to respect the reality of the way that I express myself and the way that I exchange with my mother. It also says something about what it means to, when you come from exilic stories and where there's ruptures and gaps between generations, it's a great tragedy to have a mother that will never fully master your native language, which is French. And it's a great tragedy for parents to never, to have their children never fully master their native language, even when they try to transmit it. So I wanted to transform that into something positive and think it's not that my mother is lacking French and it's not that I'm lacking Arabic. We actually have French and Arabic and the third language, that is the fact that we can mix both. So it opens our perceptions. And I also think, as the Kateb Yassin, the Algerian fighter and writer, said, French is what we won from the colonization and the war, so we should use it as much as we want and can. And I think it's also going back to what Edward Said was saying about exile. That is the greatest tragedy that a human being has to go through and can live. And at the same time, it's a way to reinvent yourself in the margin. And so I think this is what our generation is trying to do. Instead of feeling, as the generations before us, torn between a place and another, it's about creating our own intermediary space that is kind of something that can fly above the rest. And it's also a way to counter the stigma, because they always try to understand if we're here or there. And they don't understand that we're in all places at the same time, which is very scary for them because we can move around quicker. And this is what we have to, grasp. Thank you. Thank you very much.